Ink-a-dink, 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 ink-a-dink. Wow!
Good evening. Welcome to Basil BuddhaCat Presents. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be Basil's host tonight. With us, of course, in the center slot, we have Basil. And tonight, for our guest, we have Mr. Hot in the Republican Party. Well, in many respects. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House of Representatives for what we know is 2 years, but what Newt likes to think of as being the entire administration between Reagan, Bush, #1, and Clinton, and Newt's got a lot of feels a lot of responsibility for a lot of good stuff, including balanced budgets, which he likes to promote. But at any rate, we're going to have some call-ins tonight. We're looking forward to talking to people. But first, I have Newt by phone. Newt is in South Carolina, still, as he calls it, partying his way down to Florida. Now, a little background. Newt won the South Carolina primary by a substantial margin. He went in looking at about a 12 percentage underdog, and in fact ended up winning South Carolina by 12 points over Mitt Romney. Rick Santorum was in at about 17%. Ron Paul, who had done quite well in the first caucus in Iowa and the subsequent primary in New Hampshire, came in a distant fourth, but he says that those aren't really his folks. The evangelicals are not keen on Ron Paul. They're looking for somebody that is looking to represent them better than he does. Well, that's our first call-in. Basil BuddhaCat Presents. We had not expected a call-in early as this, but go ahead. What's your question? What's your comment? And who are you? Okay, someone calling in from the South Carolina sanitarium, he says. And you're on the phone there. Okay, well, we cannot hear you over the air, so what you're going to have to do then is pose your question or your comment, and then go ahead and I'll repeat it to the audience, and then Basil and Mr. Gingrich can comment on that also. This gentleman, he's saying that, in fact, he's the best. He's the real conservative. Well, sir, I understand there's a lot of conservatives, a lot of evangelicals in South Carolina, but I don't understand why you think of yourself as being, oh, it's not someone calling from the sanitarium. In fact, it's Rick Santorum. He says, okay, Mr. Santorum, I know we've got you scheduled on a future show, but at any rate, I'd like to, do you have a comment, question for Mr. Gingrich? Question, he says, no. Mr. Gingrich, he says, is not a conservative. He's probably the most, he says, well, he's actually going to quote Ann Coulter on this one, because Ann Coulter, well-known right-wing beanpole. I understand, Mr. Santorum, yeah. Ann Coulter, well-known right-wing Republican commentarian, has described Newt Gingrich as being the most left of all the candidates in the race for the Republican Party, even slightly to the left of Mr. Obama Romney, as she describes him. Now I have to put you on hold for a second here, Mr. Santorum, before we get to a little more conversation about this. But I have to advise the audience that I'll put you down. You're on hold. Be on hold for a short while. We do, in fact, have a new musical group coming to join us in future shows, amazingly enough known as Obama-Romney. Now, the notion behind the group, as I'm told by them, is that, in fact, they feel like there's not much, if any, difference between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama in terms of political leanings. Now, they also told me that they're, with all due respect, Mr. Gingrich, are a little bit concerned about you in terms of health care also, because in fact, you were there during the go-round with what was known as, at the time, as Hillary Care, which was a health care plan that was designed to include all Americans with basic health care coverage. And it didn't pass, but in fact, the alternative plan, which was proposed by the Republicans, led by you, in fact, ended up being very similar, almost identical, in fact, in the eyes of many people and many healthcare professionals, as being the plan that eventually passed under President Obama. That, in fact, it was not quite as all-inclusive as the plan that Mr. Romney proposed and then ended up signing in Massachusetts. But, in fact, it was just about the same plan. Now, Mr. Gingrich, I'm going to have you on the phone in a second. Let me just check and see if I can get you on the air, I'd be happy to. Otherwise, I'll have to do as I'm doing with Basil. Yeah, Basil has a remark to throw in. He says he's getting his paws wet in terms of getting involved in the show. This is his first go round. In fact, this is his fifth half hour show on Comcast. So he's beginning to get a sense of how to step in on the conversation and how to get his two whisker lookings in. So yes, Basil. Yeah, Basil wants me to remind the audience that Basil, in fact, does not speak English, so there's some translation that's necessary with Basil. Basil, when he opened up his Facebook page about a year and a half ago, and that Facebook page is, as you might imagine, Basil BuddhaCat on Facebook. Basil BuddhaCat, that's his name, 2 words, Basil, and then BuddhaCat is his surname. Now, Basil wants me to remind the audience, as I have in the first few shows, that when Basil got his Facebook page, he friended a gentleman by the name of John Kusumi, who is the head of the Chinese Democracy Network here in America. Now, John Kusumi is a good friend of my show, Progressive Soup. John's been on my show a number of times talking about, of all things, democracy in China and the problems with what he describes as being, whether you call it Chinese communism or Chinese totalitarianism, makes no difference. That in fact there is no Chinese communist. In fact, there is no government in China. The government is the party. The party has every say-so as far as everything that goes on in China. There's a constitution, which is a very lovely written document, which is very flowery and very elegant and very wonderful, but in fact that document means nothing because the the Communist Party in China has the say-so in everything. Now, when Basil friended John Kusumi on his Facebook page, Basil began getting Facebook requests from literally hundreds of people that knew John. And Basil did not accept all of their friend requests. He did a little intuitive picking and choosing as far as who he chose. But a lot of John's friends, who ended up becoming Basil's friends, their names are not in English per se. They're in Chinese characters. And Basil, because of that, Basil began to become more educated in terms of Chinese background, Chinese history, and learned to speak not Cantonese, but Catanese. Basil says that's his own particular dialect of Chinese, Catanese. So Basil cannot communicate directly with you, the audience, or with Newt, but he can communicate with me. I lean over, he tells me what he needs to say, and he's beginning to become a little bit more, as I say, he says, getting his paws wet as far far as joining in the conversation. Now, Basil also thinks it's important to note that he sent me to New Hampshire to the few days up to including the Republican primary, where Mr. Gingrich ended up coming in second, did fairly well, reasonable showing, but in fact Mitt Romney got a very much expected 39%. It's next to Mr. Romney's state of Massachusetts. The majority of the population in New Hampshire, in fact, is in southern New Hampshire, which is right across the border from Massachusetts. So he was well known via television. The major stations, like the Boston stations, are broadcast in New Hampshire. So that's how they know him pretty well. So he anticipated that he would do pretty well, and in fact did at 39%. So at any rate, so Basil sent me up to New Hampshire to do a little poking around and to find a little something, and to make some appointments with some of these folks that were up there, particularly Mr. Gingrich, to come on the show. And here he is. I've got him via cell phone. Newt, we're going to have a conversation with you in a short while, but we're still doing a little bit of introduction by way of Basil explaining his notion of setting me up there to come up there and meet you and photograph you up in Wolfboro. Now, Basil notes that he might have come along to see Mr. Gingrich, except the notion of it being held in Wolfboro, which is on the southern end of Lake Sunapee, Lake Winnipesaukee, the very famous Lake Winnipesaukee, which is well known through one of Basil's favorite films, What About Bob? Basil's quite enamored of that film. He likes Bill Murray. But Basil's notion of going to Wolfboro was not a comfort with him because of the name Wolfboro. Basil says the name of the town was a little too close for comfort for him, is a way Basil explained to me in advance of him sending me to go and listen and photograph. Now, Basil and I have had some conversations about this since then. And one thing Basil wants me to note about what Mr. Gingrich said in Wolfboro. Oh, hold on. No, well, oh, okay. Newt, go ahead. Yep. Yeah, Mr. Gingrich, Newt is explaining to me that he chose Wolfboro because, could I quote you on that? Yeah. He says he chose Wolfboro because it just has a nice homespun sound to it. Wolf. Okay. Okay, so at any rate, so Basil sent me along, and Basil wanted me to note that one of the things Mr. Gingrich talked about, which did in fact make Basil a little bit more comfortable with Mr. Gingrich, is that he spoke about immigrants. And he didn't take that tone of, what do you think they call it? Why do they call it illegal immigrants for? The rhetorical question. Newt took a little bit more a softer tone on immigration and said that he really in fact believes that immigrants should have a path to citizenship. They're here, they're working. We want them to be citizens ultimately, to pay taxes. He notes the ones that he's met, in fact, spoken to many people of Latino origin, that he's found, in fact, note that in fact, most of the people that have come here from other countries in mixed company with English-speaking people will speak English because they've learned the language. They've taken the English technical language courses that are offered in high schools throughout the country. They've learned the language. They'd like nothing better than to pay taxes and to be citizens. Voting is something that they think is a cherished right and would certainly never miss an opportunity to vote. Yeah, well noted, Newt. In fact, it says many Americans, in fact, take the notion of voting in elections for granted, and he feels like having a new group of American citizens would be, in fact, quite a good thing. Thank you very much. But again, back to Basil's discussion with me about Newt's remarks in Wolfboro. In fact, Basil felt fairly comfortable with the fact that Newt took what he describes as being a more humane a more Christian approach to immigration than, in fact, most people that describe themselves as being born agains, evangelicals, conservative Christians take toward immigration. In fact, most of them seem to, and we don't have numbers on that, but most of them seem to, in fact, blame immigrants pretty much for everything, from crowding in hospitals, where in fact a lot of the evangelicals, those Americans that do not have health care coverage, and that's a sizable proportion of the native-born population in America, do not have health care coverage. And in fact, when they have an illness, they pretty much resign themselves that when they can't get to a clinic, and there are a number of clinics in America that are nonprofit and run by different groups, that if they can't get to a clinic, if it's something on short notice, they end up in emergency rooms. And that's where they come in contact with where a lot of their contact with non-English speaking people are. In fact, but I think Mr. Gingrich noted that they tend to speak amongst themselves when they're with family. They do speak the native language, but they know English pretty well and use it pretty well. In fact, better than a lot of the evangelicals and right-wingers that disparage them. They, in fact, speak better English than a lot of them in many cases. But at any rate, so hold on. I've got, I'm going to see if Mr. Santorum is on the line still. Nope, hold on. Let's see if that's him trying to dial us back. Oh, pardon me. Basil BuddhaCat presents. Yeah. This is Mr. Santorum again. He says that, in fact, he is the real Christian conservative, that Newt Gingrich is way left of what he likes, as is Mitt Romney, and he says he's going to get that nomination because he represents what the Republican Party is all about. Okay, I got that right? Okay, thanks, Mr. Santorum. I got that right. Okay, Mr. Santorum, it's important to note, though, that when Governor Perry from Texas withdrew from the race prior to South Carolina, he, in fact, through his endorsement, at least the majority of his endorsement, he spoke best of and did not use the word endorsement. He spoke of Mr. Gingrich as being the best qualified candidate for the Republican Party for the presidential nomination. Okay. That's understandable. Yep. Mr. Santorum says he's still, in fact, looking for some of the other evangelical and Christian conservative candidates to drop out of the race and, in fact, endorse him instead. Okay, well, we shall see if that happens. That's important to watch out for, Rick. And I need to get back to the conversation with Mr. Gingrich. Thank you. Okay, get you back on the phone. Mr. Gingrich, or would you prefer I call you Speaker Gingrich? Okay. He says I can call him Newt if I'd like, and that's no problem. If I want a title, it's Speaker Gingrich. Now, Speaker Gingrich, or Newt, if you will, Mr. Santorum, and I didn't want to say it while he was on the air. I wanted to digest it a bit before I spoke. But Mr. Santorum did note that he's watching you on camera, and in fact, he thinks that's exactly the location in the studio here at the table is exactly where he thinks you should be, and that's way out in left field. Now, having said that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about South Carolina and how exactly you made such incredible inroads looking backwards at South Carolina and what you anticipate in Florida. Okay, thanks very much. Yep. Okay, Speaker Gingrich is saying that Florida is going to be a tough one because that's where Mitt Romney has in fact placed incredible amounts of advertising, both himself and his PAC. Now, Speaker Gingrich, you have a PAC also, and I think that's important to note. But it's fair to note also that they don't have the kind of money that Mr. Romney's PAC seems to be flush with. But go ahead. Yep. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Mr. Gingrich is saying that he thinks he'll do well in Florida. It's not the most important state to him, but he thinks he'll do well there because I think he feels like he's respected amongst Latino voters who are Republicans. Okay, go ahead. He thinks he fits their description of values candidates pretty well. Okay, yep. He says he expects to do well at any rate, but we shall see what we shall see, were his exact words. Thank you very much. I'm going to put you on hold for a second, Mr. Gingrich, and I'm going to, because Basil has something he wants to add in. Okay, yes, Basil. Basil is saying that he kind of likes that cute little jingle at the beginning of this show. And he's had a chance to watch it now, watch the finished product for the first two shows a bit. And he says he kind of likes the jingle, and he wants me to repeat it and sing it along with him. And of course, he'll be singing in Cantonese. And he's got a bit of a soft voice also, so you may not hear him, but I'll give it a go, Basil. Okay. Ink-a-dink, 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 ink-a-dink. Ink-a-dink. Wow. He says, yeah. He may want to stay with that for a while. In fact, he says he may want to keep me on as his co-host for a while longer. He's coaxing, actually, his housemate, Lilith, who also has a Facebook page, who appears in the opening shots and closing shots for Basil's show. Lilith, with the last name Tail included, free of charge. Now, Basil wants me to explain also, of course, that he named her that because, and he also encouraged her to put together a Facebook page. And the reason why it's Tail included, free of charge is because, as Basil well notes, Lilith came from the Danbury Animal Welfare Society, and she's also a Maine Coon. She's got, in fact, unlike Basil, who has, Basil says it's the perfect length tail, but it's about an inch long. That's Basil's tail. Whereas Lilith's tail, big and fluffy. And that's why, it's important to know, Basil, that we did not pay any extra when we acquired Lilith and decided to adopt her and bring her into Basil's house. But Basil says that, it's a big, long, fluffy tail. It kind of gets in the way sometimes. Sometimes when she walks past him, it kind of flits at him a little bit. But, okay. Enough said about Lilith, he said. He's talking with her about possibly becoming his co-host. We'll see. Okay, we're going to take a short break for a public service announcement because we want to give myself a chance to go to the men's room and get a little bit of this congestion out of my schnazola. This is Basil BuddhaCat Presents. I'm David Stevenson. Basil BuddhaCat. We also have former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich with us, and we shall continue in just a moment. Thank you. Welcome back to Basil BuddhaCat Presents. Basil wanted to take a quick litter box stop, and I wanted to take care of some congestion, so done, and back. Now, I'm going to get Mr. Gingrich back on the phone. Okay. Now, Speaker Gingrich, It's been noted, and you were asked about that at the beginning of the debate for South Carolina, pardon me, by the reporter from CNN, John King. And his question to you was about your relationship with your first wife, second wife, and third wife, a question about open marriage. And I don't want to take that any further than you want to, because I understand that you don't think that's of any consequence. But and in fact, I guess perhaps it's been proven out now that that with so-called right-wing conservative, what they describe themselves as being values voters, that in fact they've accepted the fact that they're okay with the fact you've been married 3 times, and some of the details along the way, some of the questions about open marriage, and I guess that's been put to rest. So we'll put that to rest too. Okay, that's what you prefer. That's fine. We'll do that. But it just needed to be noted. Okay. We're going to expect some more call-ins, but in the meanwhile, okay, let's see who we've got this time. Basil BuddhaCat presents. Okay, now I do apologize for mistaking the word santorum for sanitarium, but at any rate, yes, Mr. Santorum, we will have you on the show. It's important to note that we will have former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum on the show. If not next week, then certainly soon thereafter. We're also looking for a delivery of... now I'm going to make sure that people understand that these are your words and not... these are your words and not Speaker Gingrich's, not Basil's, and not mine. Says we're probably also expecting a delivery of pizza, too. Okay, I'm not going to go any further with that with Mr. Santorum, but let it be said that you said that, and not any of us here on the show. Do you have any additional comments or a question for Mr. Gingrich that you haven't had the opportunity to ask him in any of the 39 debates so far? Okay. He just wants to reiterate that his cardigan sweater proves he's a sharper man than Mitt Romney, and his values speak for themselves. He's only been married once, he says, and I think I don't want that to be any kind of a jab at anyone else, Mr. Santorum. But at any rate, Mr. Santorum, we're going to have to break it off there because we've come to the end of the show. Thank you very much for calling in again. We are going to come back and do a second show, which will be aired on Sunday morning. We're going to talk a little bit more about religious aspects of the Republican primary and of America in general, because it's going to be Sunday morning when it's aired. Thank you very much. This is Basil BuddhaCat Presents, David Stevenson, Basil BuddhaCat, and our guest on the show, on the next show also, Newt Gingrich. Thanks very much. Good night.
They say they'd rob your grandma blind on Wall Street, on Wall Street. Fritter her away her Medicare on Wall Street. And Pharma Oil and their pet fox don't care if she lives in a box, so long as they wear platinum jocks on Wall Street, on Wall Street. Meow.